In a silent mansion, a paralyzed girl and an absent father live in worlds divided by grief. Everything changes when a resilient caretaker walks through the door, bringing warmth, color, and presence. Little by little, laughter returns, the paintbrushes come alive, and the father reconnects with his daughter on the floor of a room. There, between colors and tears, a new family is born, where true wealth is the love that stays. Before we begin this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like on the video, which is very important to us, and tell us from which city you are watching this story. Robert Henry Anderson always knew that success had its price. At 42, he had built a tech empire that placed him among the wealthiest men in the United States. His company, Innovatech Solutions, dominated the market for digital solutions in agribusiness, and his name was revered in boardrooms from New York to London. But on that Thursday afternoon, as the driver parked the black Mercedes in front of the wrought iron gate of his Upper East Side mansion, Robert didn't feel like a winner. He felt like a ghost, returning to a place where he had once been happy. It had been over a year since he had returned home before 9 at night. Over a year since he had avoided the silent hallways, the dusty paintings, the memories that lingered like smoke in every room of the 3-story house. But today, something had compelled him to cancel his afternoon meetings, to ignore the incessant calls from his assistant, and to ask to be taken straight home. Perhaps it was the bone-deep weariness he carried, or perhaps it was the letter he had received that morning from a hospital in Stamford, Connecticut, reminding him that his daughter had missed her last 3 physical therapy sessions. Isabella. His daughter's name echoed in his mind like a melody he had been trying to forget for 18 months. 18 months since the world had collapsed on their heads on a rainy March night, when a drunk driver decided his fun was worth more than an entire family's life. 18 months since Helen, his wife, his partner of 15 years, had left this world in the passenger seat of their BMW, while he, at the wheel, had walked away without a scratch. A miracle, the doctors said. A curse, Robert knew. The key turned in the lock with a metallic click that seemed to echo throughout the house. Robert pushed open the mahogany door and was greeted by the familiar scent of lavender and polished wood, a smell that Mrs. Carmen, the housekeeper, religiously maintained even in his absence. Mrs. Carmen, who had worked for the family for over 10 years, who had seen Isabella take her first steps in that very entrance hall, who had held Helen's hand during the pains of childbirth, who had cried more than he had on the day of the funeral. Robert closed the door behind him and stood in the hall, listening to the silence that had become the soundtrack of his life. But then, coming from the second floor, a sound made his blood run cold. A laugh, a crystal-clear, childish laugh, full of life. A laugh that shouldn't exist in that house, not anymore. His feet moved on their own towards the marble staircase. With each step, the laughter grew clearer, more real, more impossible. When he reached the second floor, the sound was clearly coming from Isabella's room, that pink bedroom he had avoided for over a year, where his daughter's toys remained untouched since that fateful night. Robert approached the half-open door, and what he saw made him stop breathing. Isabella, his little Isabella, was out of her wheelchair. An unknown woman was holding her in her arms, spinning in slow circles, making her fly like an airplane. They were both covered in colorful paint. There was paper scattered on the floor, brushes in makeshift containers, and his daughter's face was lit up by a smile he hadn't seen in 18 months. For a moment, Robert felt as if he were watching a scene from another life, from a parallel world where the tragedy had never happened. But then reality hit him like a punch to the gut. Who was that woman? What was she doing there? And why had she managed to awaken in his daughter something that he, her own father, hadn't been able to in all that time? Without a sound, Robert backed down the hallway. He descended the stairs like a thief in his own home and locked himself in his study, where the leather-paneled walls and business trophies greeted him with their familiar coldness. There, sitting in the Italian leather armchair that Helen had chosen for him on their honeymoon in Milan, Robert finally allowed the tears he had held back for 18 months to begin to fall. The memory came as it always did, sharp and cruel, every detail preserved in his mind like a macabre photograph. They were coming back from a dinner at Paralyzed, celebrating the closing of a multi-million-dollar contract that had secured Innovatech's expansion into the American Market. Helen was beautiful that night, wearing the navy blue dress he had bought for her in Paris, laughing at his bad jokes, planning the family vacation they would take at the end of the month. Isabella was asleep in the back seat, tired after a full day of school and swimming lessons, her curly hair spread over the teddy bear her mother had given her for her birthday. The rain had started to fall as they took the FDR drive. Robert slowed down, always careful, always responsible. Helen commented on something about the traffic, about how they were getting home early, about how Isabella would be happy not to have to wake up early the next day. Those were the last words she ever said. The car came from the side, a red Ford Fiesta driven by a 22-year-old kid who had spent the night drinking at a bar in the East Village. The young man had tried to pass two cars at once and lost control on the wet pavement. The impact was devastating. Robert's BMW rolled over 3 times before landing upside down in a ditch beside the road. When Robert regained consciousness, he was still held by the seatbelt, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Helen was beside him, motionless, her eyes open but empty, staring at something he couldn't see. In the back seat, Isabella was moaning softly, conscious but unable to move, her legs trapped under the wreckage of the seat that had come loose with the impact. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, 20 minutes during which Robert held his wife's cold hand and whispered words of comfort to his daughter, promising that everything would be all right, that they would soon be home, that it was just a nightmare that would pass. Lies that would become even more painful truths in the weeks that followed. Helen was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner later revealed that she had died instantly, that she hadn't suffered. This information should have brought Robert some comfort, but it only deepened his guilt. Why him? Why had he been spared? Why couldn't he protect his family? Isabella survived, but the damage to her spine was irreversible. The doctors gently explained that she would never walk again, that she would need special care, constant physical therapy, a new kind of life. Robert heard every word as if spoken in another language, unable to process that his daughter, who had taken her first steps in the very hall where he had been standing moments before, would never again run through the corridors of their home, never again climb into her parents' bed on a Sunday morning, never again be the mischievous, life-filled girl he had known. The months that followed were a blur of hospitals, lawyers, a funeral, and silence. Robert tried to be strong, tried to be the father Isabella needed, but every glance from his daughter brought him back to that terrible night. She never blamed. Him never asked why he hadn't been able to avoid the accident, but Robert saw the question in her eyes, or at least he thought he did. The guilt grew inside him like a cancer, feeding on every physical therapy session he attended, every tear Isabella shed when she thought he wasn't looking. Every night she woke up screaming, calling for the mother who would never come back. So Robert began to pull away. First, it was the meetings that stretched later and later. Then, the business trips he had once avoided. Soon he was living more at the company's office than at home, burying himself in work as if multi-million-dollar contracts could erase the pain, as if professional success could compensate for personal failure. Mrs. Carman took over Isabella's care with the dedication of a grandmother, but Robert knew it wasn't enough. His daughter needed specialized care, physical therapy, and stimulation that a 60-year-old housekeeper, no matter how dedicated, couldn't provide. So the caregivers came. The first was an experienced nurse who lasted only 2 weeks before quitting, saying he couldn't handle the heavy atmosphere of the house. The second was a physical therapist recommended by the hospital, who endured for a month before finding some excuse to leave. There were others. There were always others, but none could handle the suffocating silence that had settled in that house, with a girl who seemed to have given up on life, and a father who was just an occasional shadow in the hallways. Robert knew he was failing as a father, knew that Isabella was withering away in the loneliness he had created around her. But there was always an important meeting, an urgent contract, an unavoidable trip. It was easier to solve the problems of the business world than to face his daughter's gaze, simpler to build financial empires than to rebuild a shattered family. And then, on that Thursday afternoon, something had changed. Maybe it was the letter from the hospital, reminding him of the missed sessions. Maybe it was the report his assistant had left on his desk, showing that Innovatech had achieved its best quarter in history just as his personal life had hit rock bottom. Or maybe it was simply the exhaustion of carrying so much weight alone, the fatigue of pretending everything was fine when nothing was. Robert looked at the desk clock. Helen had given him on their first wedding anniversary. 4:30 in the afternoon. Isabella would probably be doing her physical therapy exercises or studying with the private tutor Mrs. Carmen had hired, or simply staring out the window as she did most days. At least that's what Robert imagined, because it had been so long since he'd spent an afternoon at home that he had completely lost the rhythm of his own daughter's life. But that laugh changed everything. That laugh he hadn't heard in 18 months, that crystal-clear giggle that used to echo through the house when Helen tickled Isabella, or when they played hide-and-seek, or when they watched animated movies together that Robert had always found silly, but would now give anything to watch again. Who was that woman who had managed to awaken his daughter? How had she achieved in a few days or weeks what he hadn't managed in over a year? And why did Robert feel, besides the obvious gratitude, a pang of bitter jealousy, a painful envy of someone who had been able to give life back to his daughter while he could only be a constant source of sadness and abandonment? The study was growing dark when Robert finally rose from the armchair. Outside, the typical late afternoon traffic of New York City created an urban symphony of engines, horns, and distant voices. Life went on as normal for millions of people. But in that house, on the second floor, a small revolution was happening. His daughter was laughing again. Robert knew he had to go up, that he had to meet this mysterious woman, that he had to understand how she had achieved the impossible. But he also knew he wasn't ready. Not yet. After 18 months of hiding behind work and guilt, he no longer knew how to be a father, no longer knew how to look at Isabella without seeing the accident, without feeling the crushing weight of failure. So he decided to wait. He would wait until that woman left, talk to Mrs. Carmen, find out who she was and what she was doing there. Then perhaps he would find the courage to go up to the pink bedroom and face his daughter's eyes for the first time in months. Because one thing was clear. As Robert heard the distant echoes of that laughter, he thought he had lost forever. Something had changed in that house, and for the first time in 18 months he allowed himself to feel a microscopic spark of something that resembled hope. Night was falling over New York City when Robert finally heard footsteps descending the stairs, low voices in the hall, a warm goodbye in English, and then the sound of the door closing. Mrs. Carmen went back up, probably to help Isabella with dinner and her nightly routine. And Robert remained in the study, alone with his thoughts and the memory of that laugh that had changed everything, knowing that tomorrow he would have to make a decision. He would have to choose between continuing to hide behind his corporate success or finally finding the courage to be a father again. And for the first time in a long time, Robert wasn't sure which path he would choose. Marina Oliver had learned very early on that life rarely offered second chances, but when they came, you had to grab them with both hands. At 28, she carried the weight of being a single mother, a widow, and the main breadwinner for a family that consisted of her and her 5-year-old daughter, Sophia. But on that Monday morning, as she climbed the marble steps of the Upper East Side mansion, Marina felt something different pulsing in her chest. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the desperate need for this job to work out. Mrs. Carmen greeted her at the back door, as was customary for employees. The housekeeper, a woman with grey hair pinned in a perfect bun and kind eyes that had seen too much of life, studied Marina from head to toe with the experienced gaze of someone who had witnessed many caregivers come and go from that house in recent months. Marina wore her best dress, a simple navy blue model she had bought from a clearance rack at Macy's 3 years ago, when she was still married and could afford the luxury of new clothes. Her brown hair was tied back in a functional ponytail, and she carried a faux leather bag where she kept her resume, her references, and a small box of colored pencils she always brought to jobs with children. Mrs. Carmen herself had made the contact. After seeing yet another caregiver give up on the Anderson family, she had sought out her cousin Lourdes, who worked at a specialized caregiver agency. Lourdes knew Marina through Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, where they both attended Sunday Mass with their daughters. When she heard that the family needed someone to care for a girl with special needs, Lourdes immediately thought of Marina. Marina had no specific training in physical therapy or nursing, but she had something many qualified professionals lacked: real experience with pain, loss, and starting over. Her husband, Junior, had died in a workplace accident 2 years earlier, leaving her alone with Sophia and a hospital debt that still haunted her. Since then, she had worked 3 different jobs. In the mornings, she cared for the elderly at a nursing home in Brooklyn. In the afternoons, she tutored neighborhood kids. And at night, she cleaned offices downtown. When Lourdes told her about the position at the Andersons' house, Marina hesitated. She had heard stories about wealthy families who treated their employees like furniture, who demanded total dedication without offering respect in return. But the salary offered was 3 times the sum of her other jobs, and it included a transportation and meal allowance. More importantly, it would be a Monday to Friday job, from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, which meant she could spend evenings and weekends with Sophia for the first time in 2 years. Mrs. Carmen led Marina through the silent corridors of the house, pointing out the main rooms and explaining the domestic routine. The mansion was impressive, with furniture that probably cost more than Marina's annual salary, paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum, and a decor that blended European elegance with American touches. But there was something oppressive about the atmosphere, as if the air were heavier, as if the house itself were in mourning. As they walked, Mrs. Carmen told the family's story. She spoke of Helen, the deceased wife, who had turned that house into a home full of life and laughter. She told of Robert, the absent husband, who had practically lived at his company's office since the accident. And finally, she spoke of Isabella, the girl who had become the center of her concern. The housekeeper didn't hide the difficulty of the situation. Isabella, she explained, had become a completely different child after the accident. Before she was talkative, curious, full of energy. Now she spent her days in silence, rarely ate, and showed no interest in anything. She had rejected all previous caregivers, not out of hostility, but with an indifference that was even more painful. The doctors said it was childhood depression, a natural reaction to the trauma and losses she had suffered. They recommended therapy, medication, constant stimulation. But how do you stimulate a child who seemed to have given up on life? How do you medicate longing? How do you do therapy with someone who refused to speak? When they reached the 2nd floor, Mrs. Carmen stopped in front of a pink door decorated with butterfly stickers that Helen had probably put there years ago. On the other side of that door was the biggest professional challenge Marina had ever faced. Isabella's room was a preserved sanctuary of an interrupted childhood. The pink walls were covered with drawings the girl had made before the accident, school papers with gold stars, family photos where everyone was smiling. A bookshelf held children's books, dolls lined up with military precision, and educational games that hadn't been touched in months. In the center of the room, next to the white canopy bed, was a pink pediatric wheelchair that seemed larger than its occupant. Isabella was sitting in the chair, looking out the window that overlooked the backyard garden. Her curly hair, which shone with health in the photos scattered around the room, was now dull and unkempt. She wore light pink flannel pajamas that were loose on her thin little body, and her eyes held that distant expression Marina knew well. It was the look of someone who had given up hoping for things to get better. Mrs. Carmen made the introductions in a soft voice, explaining that Marina would be the new caregiver, that she would come every day to keep her company and help with her exercises. Isabella didn't respond, didn't look at Marina, didn't show any reaction. She simply continued to stare at the garden, as if the 2 women didn't exist. Marina felt a familiar tightness in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced when Sophia cried for 3 straight months after her father's death, when her daughter refused to eat, to play, to smile. The feeling of being faced with a pain so deep it seemed impossible to touch, let alone heal. But Marina also recognized something else in Isabella's eyes. Behind the apathy, behind the silence, there was a microscopic spark of what could be curiosity. The girl had noticed her presence, even while pretending otherwise, and when Marina opened her bag and took out the small box of colored pencils, she saw Isabella take a quick, almost imperceptible glance before returning her gaze to the window. Mrs. Carmen excused herself after explaining the meal and medication schedules, leaving Marina alone with Isabella. The house fell silent, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock and the distant sound of New York City traffic. Marina didn't try to force a conversation. Instead, she pulled a chair up next to Isabella and simply sat down. She opened the box of colored pencils, took out a sheet of paper she always carried in her bag, and started to draw. Not an elaborate drawing, just simple shapes. A house, a tree, a sun with a smiling face. For 15 minutes, Marina drew in silence. Isabella continued to look out the window, but Marina could sense that the girl's attention was divided between the garden outside and the paper filling with color beside her. When she finished the first drawing, Marina left it on the table and started another. This time she drew a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands. That's when Isabella finally spoke. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. "My mom draws better than you." Marina's heart raced. The first words. She continued drawing as if nothing had happened, but inside she was celebrating. "I'm sure she does," Marina replied naturally. "Could you teach me how she does it?" Isabella turned her head for the first time, looking directly at Marina. Her eyes were green like Helen's in the photos, but they carried a sadness no child should ever know. "She's not here anymore," Isabella said, as if testing whether Marina already knew the truth. "I know," Marina replied softly. "Mrs. Carmen told me. I'm very sorry." Isabella studied Marina's face for a moment, searching for signs of pity or insincerity. She found neither. Marina didn't have teary eyes of compassion or the forced smiles of someone trying to cheer her up at all costs. She just had a serene expression of someone who understood that some pains were too great to be minimized with words. "You lost someone too," Isabella said. It wasn't a question. Marina stopped drawing and looked at the girl. "How do you know?" "Your eyes. They're the same as mine when I look in the mirror." The observation was so precise and mature that it sent a chill down Marina's spine. This girl had developed an emotional perception far beyond her years, likely as a defense mechanism amidst so much suffering. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," Marina said simply. "My daughter Sophia's father." "How old is Sophia?" 5. "Was she sad too?" "Very. For months, she didn't want to do anything. She didn't eat, didn't play, didn't smile. And now," Marina picked up a blue pencil and added clouds to the family drawing. "Now she laughs again. Not always, not like before, but she does. The people we love leave us with longing, but they also leave us with good memories. And the good memories, when we're ready, can bring back smiles." Isabella was thoughtful for a few minutes. Then, to Marina's surprise, she reached her hand toward the box of colored pencils. "Can I try?" Those 3 words marked the beginning of a slow but steady transformation. Isabella picked up a red pencil and with cautious movements began to add details to Marina's drawing. At first it was just small dots, then timid lines, until she got excited and started drawing flowers around the house. As they drew together, Isabella began to talk. Short sentences at first, then entire paragraphs. She told Marina about the nightmares she had almost every night, where she heard the sound of crashing metal and couldn't find her mother. She talked about how she felt guilty for surviving when her mother had died, about how she thought her father avoided her because she reminded him of the accident. Marina listened without judging, without trying to correct or minimize the girl's feelings. She just listened and, from time to time, shared small stories about her own experience with grief. She told her how Sophia had blamed herself for her father's death, thinking that if she had been a better daughter, he wouldn't have had to work so much and wouldn't have had the accident. She explained how it had taken a lot of time and patience to make her daughter understand that some bad things happen regardless of whether we are good or bad. The first day went by faster than Marina expected. When it was time to leave, Isabella seemed reluctant to see her go. There was a small pile of drawings on the table, created in partnership, and for the first time in months, the girl had eaten the entire meal Mrs. Carmen had served. In the following days, Marina established a careful routine. She always arrived at the same time, with different materials. One day she brought modeling clay, another day she brought magazines for collages, and another, a small keyboard she had bought at a second-hand store. She didn't force activities, just offered options, and let Isabella choose what she wanted to do. Gradually, the girl emerged from the cocoon of silence she had built around herself. She started asking questions about Sophia, about Marina's life, about how it was possible to move on after losing someone important. Marina answered honestly, without romanticizing the process or promising that the pain would disappear completely. The major turning point came on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after Marina had started working at the house. Isabella had been particularly melancholic all morning, refusing to get out of her wheelchair, even for the basic exercises they did every day. When Marina asked what was wrong, Isabella finally broke down. "I can't remember Mommy's laugh anymore," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I try, but I can't hear it in my head, and I'm scared I'm going to forget her completely." Marina's heart ached. She knew that feeling exactly, because she had gone through the same thing with Junior. The details of a loved one that slowly fade, as if death was stealing pieces of memory along with their physical presence. "Do you know what your mom used to do when you were little that made you laugh?" Marina asked. "She would pretend I was an airplane," Isabella replied between sobs. "She'd lift me up and run around the house making engine noises. She said I was the most beautiful airplane in the world." "Want to try?" Isabella looked at Marina in surprise. "But I can't. My legs." "Airplanes don't fly with their legs," Marina said with a smile. "They fly with their wings. And you have the best wings I've ever seen." Before Isabella could protest, Marina lifted her from the wheelchair and took her into her arms. The girl was lighter than she looked, all the weight she had lost during the months of sadness making her as fragile as a little bird. Marina started walking around the room, making engine noises and tilting Isabella from side to side as if she were flying. The reaction was instantaneous. Isabella started to laugh, nervously at first, then genuinely, until she was giggling in a way she hadn't in 18 months. Marina continued the flight through the room, then into the hallway, describing the imaginary landscapes they were flying over: fluffy clouds, snow-capped mountains, blue oceans where whales danced. When they finally landed back in the room, they were both breathless and covered in paint that had splattered from the drawings scattered on the table. Isabella was still laughing, her eyes shining in a way Marina hadn't seen before. The wheelchair was forgotten in the corner, and for the first time in a long time, it seemed Isabella had remembered she was a child. It was at that exact moment that Robert came home early from work and went upstairs to investigate the impossible sound of his daughter's laughter. It was this moment of pure joy and connection that he witnessed through the crack in the door, and that made him realize something fundamental had changed in his family's life. Marina didn't know they were being watched. She just held Isabella, who was still laughing softly, and whispered words of affection in her ear. She told her she was brave, that she was strong, that she deserved to be happy. And for the first time since she had started this job, Marina felt that she might actually be able to help this family find their way back to each other. What she didn't imagine was that Isabella's father was on the other side of the door, witnessing the scene that would change everything, and that in the coming days her presence in the Anderson household would be questioned in ways she could never have predicted. Robert spent the entire night at the office, but he couldn't work. Sitting in the penthouse of the Innovatech building on the 25th floor of a commercial tower in Midtown Manhattan, he watched the city lights spread to the horizon and tried to process what he had seen that afternoon. Isabella laughing, his daughter who hadn't shown emotion in 18 months giggling as if joy had never left her life. The image of the unknown woman holding Isabella in her arms replayed in his mind like a movie on a loop. Who was she? How had she achieved in a few weeks what he hadn't managed in over a year? And why did Robert feel, along with gratitude, a bitter pang of something that could only be envy? The next morning, Robert cancelled all his meetings and called Sergio Mendoza, a private investigator the company occasionally used for background checks on key employees. Sergio was discreet, efficient, and didn't ask unnecessary questions, exactly what Robert needed at that moment. "I need a full background check on someone," Robert said over the phone, looking out his executive office window. "Marina Oliver. She works at my house as a caregiver. I want to know everything. Personal history, professional, financial, references, family, everything. Sergio promised results in 48 hours. While he waited, Robert tried to focus on work, but found it impossible. Every time he started to analyze a report or join a video conference, his mind wandered back home to the second floor, to the pink bedroom where his daughter was being cared for by a stranger who had performed the miracle he couldn't. On Thursday afternoon, Sergio sent the report by email. Robert locked his office door and read every line with the attention he normally reserved for multi-million-dollar contracts. What he discovered left him speechless. Marina Oliver, 28 years old, from upstate New York, resident of New York City for 8 years. Married to Edson Jr. Scott, an industrial maintenance technician, deceased 2 years ago in a workplace accident at an auto parts factory in Queens. Mother of Sophia Scott, 5 years old. No criminal record, no outstanding debts. A regular attendee of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church in her neighborhood. Professional history: caregiver at a nursing home, private tutor, nighttime office cleaner. Total monthly income, approximately $2,500. Address: a 2-room rented apartment in Brooklyn, monthly rent, $800. Financial situation: stable but tight, no assets in her name. What caught Robert's attention most were the personal references. All previous employers described Marina as exceptional, dedicated, loving with children. The principal of Sophia's school mentioned her as a present and involved mother, despite her financial difficulties. The priest at her church had known her for years and vouched for her moral integrity and charitable spirit. But it was the last paragraph of the report that made Robert stop breathing. Sergio had discovered that Marina used part of her own, already tight salary to buy art supplies and small gifts for the children she cared for. In the last 15 days, she had spent $120 on colored pencils, paper, paint, and a toy keyboard. $120 that would likely be missed from her monthly grocery budget in an economy that was barely surviving. Robert closed his laptop and lowered his head. Here was a woman who earned in a month what he earned in an hour, living in a financial situation he would consider desperate, and yet she was spending her own money to bring joy to his daughter, while he, a billionaire, could barely manage to have dinner with Isabella once a week. That afternoon, for the second time in 2 days, Robert left the office early. But this time he had a clear objective. He needed to meet Marina, to understand how she had achieved the impossible, and most importantly, he needed to thank her for bringing his daughter back to life. He arrived home at 4 in the afternoon and found Mrs. Carmen preparing a snack in the kitchen. The housekeeper was surprised to see him but asked no questions. She simply informed him that Marina and Isabella were in the bedroom doing physical therapy exercises. Robert climbed the stairs with a racing heart. Outside the room, he could hear low voices, a conversation that sounded natural and relaxed. How long had it been since he had heard his daughter talking like that? He knocked softly on the door. The voices stopped. "Come in," said a female voice he didn't recognize. Robert pushed the door open and saw the scene that would change his perspective forever. Isabella was on the floor, on a colorful mat, doing stretching exercises with Marina's help. They were both smiling, and when Isabella saw her father, her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in months. "Daddy," she exclaimed, genuinely happy. "Marina is teaching me new exercises. Want to see?" Robert felt a lump in his throat. When was the last time Isabella had been happy to see him? When was the last time she had called him Daddy with that tone of affection? "Of course, Princess," he managed to say, his voice a little hoarse. "I'd love to see." Marina stood up and introduced herself formally. She was smaller than Robert had imagined, with brown hair tied in a practical ponytail and brown eyes that conveyed a serenity he hadn't seen in a long time. She wore simple but clean clothes and had calluses on her hands that spoke of a life of honest work. For the next 15 minutes, Robert watched his daughter demonstrate the exercises she had learned from Marina. Isabella was radiant, explaining each movement with pride, occasionally correcting her father's posture when he tried to help. It was as if she had rediscovered her own body, as if she had remembered she could be strong even with her limitations. When Isabella grew tired and asked to rest, Robert offered to carry her to the wheelchair. For the first time in over a year, she accepted her father's embrace without resistance, resting her head on his shoulder as she used to when she was little. "Marina, can you stay a little longer?" Robert asked, after settling Isabella in the chair. "I'd like to talk to you." Marina glanced at the clock. "Of course, Mr. Anderson, I still have about 20 minutes. They went down to the study, leaving Isabella watching cartoons in her room. On the way, Robert observed how Marina walked through the house with a natural ease, as if she already knew every corridor, as if she belonged there. Mrs. Carmen greeted her warmly as they passed the kitchen, and Robert noticed how the two seemed to have developed a comfortable partnership. In the study, Robert offered one of the leather armchairs to Marina, but she preferred to stand. There was a respectful formality in her posture, but also a firmness that suggested she was not easily intimidated. "Marina," Robert began, "I need to thank you for what you've done for Isabella. I can't express how much it means to me to see my daughter smiling again." "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Anderson," Marina replied. "It's my job. And Isabella is a wonderful girl. She just needed someone to see that." The simplicity of her answer completely disarmed Robert. There was no false modesty, no attempt to impress, just the truth spoken directly. "You accomplished in 2 weeks what I couldn't in over a year," Robert admitted. "How?" Marina studied him for a moment before answering. "With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, but have you really tried?" The question was like a slap in the face. Robert felt his face flush. "What do you mean? When was the last time you spent an entire afternoon with Isabella? When was the last time you talked to her about something other than doctors or school? When was the last time you asked her what she was feeling?" Robert opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't, because he knew Marina was right. For the past 18 months, he had been a financial provider, a payer of medical bills, an organizer of third-party care. But a father. He had stopped being a father on the night of the accident. "Isabella doesn't need more toys or more medicine," Marina continued, her voice firm but not aggressive. "She needs to know she's not alone, that someone sees her as a whole person, not a victim. She needs to feel that she deserves love, not pity." "I love my daughter," Robert said defensively. "I'm sure you do," Marina replied. "But love that isn't shown is like food that isn't served. It may exist, but the hungry don't get fed by it." Robert sat down heavily in the chair behind his desk. The truth of Marina's words was brutal, but undeniable. He had hidden behind guilt, work, and pain, while his daughter withered in solitude. "I didn't know how," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Every time I look at her, I see the accident. I see Helen in the hospital. I see everything I failed to protect." Marina approached the desk and sat on the edge of the chair opposite Robert. "Mr. Anderson, may I ask a personal question?" He nodded. "Do you think Isabella blames you for the accident?" Robert raised his head, surprised by the direct question. I don't know. Sometimes I think she does." "She doesn't," Marina said with certainty. "Do you know what she told me yesterday? That she's afraid you blame her, that she thinks you'd rather she had died instead of her mother." The words hit Robert like bullets. He stood up abruptly, walking to the window to hide the tears that were starting to form. "She said that?" "Among other things. She said you avoid her because looking at her hurts. She said she feels guilty for being alive when her mother died. She said sometimes she wants to stop doing physical therapy because she thinks it's not worth getting better if no one cares." Robert pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window. The pain in his chest was physical, as if someone were squeezing his heart with their hands. "How do I fix this?" he asked, without turning around. "By starting now," Marina answered. "By going upstairs and telling your daughter you love her, that you're proud of her, that she's not to blame for anything, that you're going to learn to be the father she needs. And if I can't, then you keep trying until you can. That's what fathers do." Robert turned to face Marina. She was much younger than him, came from a completely different reality, yet there was a wisdom in her eyes that came from real experience with pain and recovery. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why do you care so much about a family of strangers?" Marina smiled for the first time since they had come down to the study. Because I recognize pain when I see it, and because I believe every child deserves to have a present father. Isabella already lost her mother. It would be a tragedy if she lost her father too, especially when he's right there, alive, able to choose to be present. In that moment, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He was going to try. He was going to set aside the fear, the guilt, the pain, and he was going to try to be the father Isabella needed. He didn't know how, he didn't know if he could, but he was going to try. "Marina," he said, "will you help me with this? I don't know how to be a father to a girl who's been through so much trauma. I don't know how to rebuild a relationship I let die. Will you teach me?" Marina studied him for a moment. "Are you sure? Because it's not easy. It will require you to change your routine, to be truly present, to put Isabella first. Are you willing to do that?" Robert thought about the last 18 months. He thought of all the meetings he had prioritized over his daughter's well-being, all the nights he had come home after she was already asleep, all the missed opportunities to simply be there. "I am," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he believed his own words. They went up to Isabella's room together. The girl was playing on a tablet, but looked up when she saw the mentor together. Robert approached the wheelchair and knelt beside his daughter, bringing himself to her eye level. "Izzy," he said, using the affectionate nickname he hadn't spoken in months. "Can I talk to you?" Isabella nodded, curious. "I want to apologize," Robert continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for pulling away from you. I'm sorry for not being the father you needed after we lost Mommy, and most of all, I'm sorry for ever letting you think that any of this was your fault." Isabella was silent, her eyes wide. "Nothing that happened was your fault," Robert said, holding his daughter's small hands. "You are the most precious thing in my life, and I was a fool for not showing you that every day. Can you forgive me?" Isabella looked at Marina, as if seeking permission to feel what she was feeling. Marina gave an encouraging nod. "I forgive you, Daddy," Isabella said, and threw herself into her father's arms. Robert hugged her tightly, feeling how thin she was against his chest, silently promising that he would never again let her doubt his love. Over his daughter's head, he looked at Marina and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Marina smiled and discreetly left the room, leaving father and daughter to finally rebuild the bridge that grief had torn down. Outside the door, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. It was always moving to see families reconnecting, but this time was special. This time, she had helped save, not just a little girl but an entire family. What Marina didn't know was that this was just the beginning. In the days that followed, Robert would begin to reorganize his entire life around his daughter, and gradually, Marina would discover that she had become much more than a caregiver to the Anderson family. She had become the key that unlocked the door to a new way of living, of loving, and of being a family. The rebuilding had begun. And for the first time in 18 months, the house on the Upper East Side would once again be a home. 3 months after that transformative afternoon, the house on the Upper East Side had become a completely different place. The oppressive silence that had dominated the hallways for 18 months had given way to a symphony of life. Laughter echoing down the stairs, lively conversations in the dining room, music coming from Isabella's room, and even the pitter-patter of small feet running through the marble corridors. Robert fulfilled his promise of change with a determination that surprised everyone, starting with himself. He completely reorganized his schedule at Innovatech, delegating responsibilities he once considered non-transferable and establishing clear boundaries between his professional and personal life. He left the office every day at 5, arrived home in time for Isabella's afternoon snack, and for the first time in years, turned off his corporate cell phone after 7 at night. The transformation was neither immediate nor easy. There were difficult days, moments when Robert felt lost trying to navigate his daughter's complex feelings, occasions when guilt still haunted him like a persistent ghost. But Marina was there, patient and firm, guiding him through the most challenging moments with the wisdom of someone who had walked similar paths of pain and reconstruction. Isabella, in turn, blossomed in ways that not even Marina had anticipated. The girl who had become a silent ghost after the accident was once again curious, talkative, and full of questions about the world around her. Her physical recovery also accelerated dramatically as her emotional motivation grew. In her physical therapy sessions, which Robert now attended religiously, she pushed herself beyond her limits, determined to show her father every small bit of progress. The most poignant moment of this period of reconstruction occurred on a Friday in April, when Robert came home to find Isabella trying to play a melody on the keyboard Marina had brought. The music was far from perfect, but there was something mesmerizing about the girl's intense concentration, the way she moved her small fingers over the keys, searching for the right notes to a song only she could hear. "What's that song, Princess?" Robert asked, sitting on the floor next to her wheelchair. "I'm trying to play the song Mommy used to sing to me before I went to sleep," Isabella replied, without stopping. Marina said that sometimes memories become clearer when you do something with your hands. Robert felt his heart clench, but not with pain this time. It was a different, sweeter sensation, as if Helen's memories were being honored instead of avoided. "Do you remember the words?" he asked. "A little. It was about a star that protected children while they slept." Robert smiled. Of course, he remembered that song. Helen had made up the melody when Isabella was a baby, an impromptu lullaby that became part of their family's nightly ritual. He hadn't heard it in almost 2 years. "Can I try to sing with you?" he offered. Isabella stopped playing and looked at her father in surprise. "You know the song?" "Of course I do. I helped Mommy make it up." That's how Marina found them when she arrived the following Monday, father and daughter sitting on the bedroom floor, sharing a melody that connected a painful past with a present full of possibilities. Robert sang in a slightly off-key voice while Isabella accompanied him on the keyboard, and for the first time since the accident, Helen's memories brought smiles instead of tears. Marina watched the scene for a few moments before making her presence known. There was something deeply gratifying in seeing this family she had helped rebuild, but there was also a pang of melancholy she couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the realization that her role here was changing, that Robert and Isabella were learning to walk together again. In truth, Marina's life had also undergone significant transformations in recent months. Robert had insisted on substantially increasing her salary, arguing that she was no longer just a caregiver, but an essential part of the family's recovery. With financial stability, Marina had been able to move into a larger apartment in Brooklyn, where Sophia had her own room for the first time in her life. Sophia, who had initially been shy about the change in her mother's routine, soon became enchanted with the stories Marina told about Isabella. The 5-year-old was constantly asking about the princess in the wheelchair, as she had nicknamed Isabella, and begged to meet her. It was on a Saturday afternoon that Marina found the courage to suggest something she had been thinking about for weeks. "Robert," she said, as they helped Isabella with her strengthening exercises, "would you mind if I brought Sophia to meet Isabella? She's always asking, and I think it would be good for both of them." Robert paused the movement he was making. In recent months, the house had opened up to Marina in a way he had never imagined possible. She was no longer just an employee, she was almost like family. The idea of expanding that circle even further made him momentarily hesitant. "What do you think, Izzy?" he asked his daughter. Isabella's face lit up immediately. "I can meet Sophia. Marina is always talking about her. Did she lose her dad too?" "She did," Marina confirmed softly. "She was 3 when it happened. She still gets sad sometimes, but she's learning that it's possible to miss someone and be happy at the same time." "Like me," Isabella said, with a maturity that still surprised Robert. "Can I teach her my exercises and show her my drawings?" And so, the following Saturday, Sophia entered the Anderson house for the first time. She was a small girl with curly hair like Isabella's, but with the typical energy of a child who hadn't experienced significant trauma. She looked at the entrance hall with wide eyes, impressed by the size and elegance of the house, but her shyness vanished completely when she saw Isabella. "You're the princess," Sophia exclaimed, running. towards the wheelchair. "Mommy said you're very brave." Isabella laughed at the smaller girl's spontaneity. "I'm not a princess. I'm Isabella, but you can call me Izzy." "I'm Sophia, but Mommy calls me Sophie. Do you want to play?" Robert and Marina watched the two girls get to know each other with the natural ease of children. Sophia showed no awkwardness or pity regarding Isabella's wheelchair. To her, it was simply a part of who Isabella was, like having curly hair or green eyes. Soon they were in Isabella's room, Sophia sitting on the floor while Isabella showed her the drawings she had made with Marina. The younger girl was genuinely impressed with Isabella's artistic talent, and they were soon drawing together, creating elaborate stories about princesses who saved entire kingdoms from sadness. Mrs. Carmen, who had prepared a special snack for the occasion, watched from the doorway with a maternal smile. "It's been a long time since this house has heard children's laughter," she commented to Marina. "It feels like we're back in the days when Mrs. Helen was here." Marina smiled but felt a pang in her chest. The comparison to Helen, though meant kindly, always made her uncomfortable. She knew she could never and should never try to replace Isabella's mother, but sometimes she wondered what exactly her place was in this rebuilt family. The following months brought a routine that none of them had anticipated, but that worked almost magically. Sophia started coming to the Anderson house 3 times a week, always with Marina. The two girls developed a deep and genuine friendship, full of the typical ups and downs of childhood, but founded on a mutual understanding of loss and resilience. Robert found himself genuinely enjoying Sophia's company. The girl had a spontaneity that amused him and an emotional wisdom that sometimes surprised him. She wasn't afraid to ask tough questions or show affection, and gradually she helped Robert become more expressive and present not only with Isabella, but with everyone he loved. It was Sophia who, on a rainy afternoon in May, made the observation that would change everything. "Uncle Robert," she said, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted for him, "you guys are like a family, right?" Robert was helping the girls with a 500-piece puzzle spread on the living room floor. He paused with a piece in his hand and looked at Sophia. "What do you mean, Sophie?" "You, Auntie Izzy, Mommy and me. We're together, we eat together, we play together. It's like a family." Isabella looked up from the puzzle. "But families are people who live in the same house." "Not always," Sophia replied with the irrefutable logic of children. "My grandma lives far away, but she's my family. And you guys take care of us, and we take care of you. It is a family." Robert felt something stir in his chest. Family. When had he stopped thinking in those terms? Since Helen's death, he had been so focused on surviving, on rebuilding his relationship with Isabella, that he hadn't realized how integral Marina and Sophia had become to their lives. He looked at Marina, who was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, watching the girls' conversation with a thoughtful expression. In recent months, she had become his confidant, his partner in raising Isabella, his source of wisdom in difficult times. And Sophia had brought a spontaneous joy that the house hadn't known in years. That night after Marina and Sophia had left, Robert talked to Isabella about her friend's comment. "What do you think, Izzy?" We are family," Isabella thought for a moment. "I think we are, Daddy. Marina takes care of us like we're her family, and Sophia is like a little sister to me, and you're happy when they're here." "I really am," Robert admitted. "And you? Are you happy?" "Very," Isabella said, smiling. "I used to think I'd never be happy again after Mommy died, but now I know it's possible to miss Mommy and still have happy moments. Marina taught me that." Robert hugged his daughter, realizing she had grown emotionally in ways he hadn't noticed. The girl who had become silent and apathetic after the accident now spoke about complex feelings with a clarity that many adults lacked. The decision came naturally, as if it had been inevitable since the first day Marina entered that house. Robert knew he wanted to make official what already existed in practice. These 4 people were a family, not a traditional one, but genuine in their ability to care for, protect, and love one another. On an afternoon in June, exactly 6 months after the day Marina had first made Isabella laugh, Robert extended an invitation that surprised everyone. "Marina," he said, after the girls had gone out to play in the garden, "would you and Sophia like to move in here?" Marina stopped in the middle of putting away the physical therapy equipment. "What do you mean?" "I mean live here, permanently. There are enough rooms, Sophia could have her own space and—" Robert hesitated, searching for the right words. "And I would like you to be an official part of this family." Marina sat down slowly, processing the proposal. "Robert, I don't know if—" "I'm not talking about marriage or a romantic commitment," Robert clarified quickly. "I'm talking about family. You are already the most important person in Isabella's life after me. Sophia is already like a sister to her, and I—" He paused, struggling to find the words. "I can't imagine our lives without the two of you anymore." Marina was silent for a long moment. The offer was tempting in many ways, but also frightening. Moving into that house would mean accepting a radical change in her life, taking on responsibilities that went far beyond professional care. "What if it doesn't work out?" she finally asked. "Then we'll face the problems together like a family does," Robert answered. "Marina, in the last few months, you've taught me how to be a father again. You've helped Isabella rediscover joy. You've brought life to a house that was dead. I can't offer romance or passion, but I can offer respect, partnership, security, and a genuine family love." That night, Marina had a long talk with Sophia about the proposal. The 5-year-old was thrilled with the idea of having her own room and seeing Isabella every day, but she also showed a surprising understanding of the implications of the move. "Mommy," she said, "do you think Daddy would be happy if we lived with Auntie Izzy and Uncle Robert?" The question was like a sweet dagger to Marina's heart. Sophia had kept her father's memory alive through photos and stories, and she still included him in her important decisions. "I think your daddy would be happy knowing you have a family that loves you," Marina answered. "He always wanted you to be happy and safe." "Then I think we should go," Sophia decided, with the typical determination of children. "Izzy needs a sister, and Uncle Robert needs someone to make him smile more." A week later, Marina and Sophia officially moved into the house on the Upper East Side. Mrs. Carmen helped organize Sophia's room, who chose lavender for the walls and insisted on having a canopy bed just like Isabella's. Marina took a room on the same floor, close enough to hear if Isabella needed anything during the night, but with enough privacy to maintain her independence. The adjustment was smoother than anyone had anticipated. Sophia brought a new energy to the house, her childish laughter echoing through the hallways, her toys scattered in the previously pristine rooms. Isabella flourished with the constant companionship, developing a sense of responsibility as an older sister that further accelerated her emotional and physical recovery. Robert found himself the father of 2 girls overnight, a role he took on with a dedication that made up for lost years. He learned to braid Sophia's curly hair, to mediate childish arguments between the two, to read stories with different voices for each character, and to turn dinners into culinary adventures where the girls could help in the kitchen. Marina naturally assumed the role of family organizer, but not in an authoritarian way. She coordinated schedules, managed Isabella's medical needs, helped Sophia with her homework, and gradually became the emotional anchor that kept the whole family balanced. The moment that definitively sealed this new family arrangement happened one evening in July, exactly 2 years after the accident that had destroyed the original Anderson family. Robert had come home from work to find the 3 women of his life in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. Isabella was in her wheelchair, chopping vegetables on an adapted cutting board. Sophia was standing on a stool, stirring a pot under Marina's watchful eye, and Marina coordinated everything with the natural ease of someone born to be a mother. The scene was so perfect, so full of life and love, that Robert just stood in the doorway watching. 2 years ago, he had lost his family in a terrible accident. Now, through persistence, forgiveness, and above all love, he had gained a new family, different from the previous one, but just as precious. "Daddy!" Sophia shouted when she saw him. "We're making your favorite food." "And I cut all the tomatoes," Isabella added proudly. "You girls did great," Robert said, kissing each of them on the forehead before approaching Marina. "And you? How was your day?" "Perfect," Marina replied, "and for the first time in a long time she truly meant it. That night, after the girls were asleep, Robert and Marina sat in the living room for their daily family chat. It was a ritual they had developed, a time to discuss the day's challenges, plan activities, and simply connect as partners in raising the children. "Marina," Robert said, looking at the fireplace where a soft fire crackled, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "When you came here, 9 months ago, I was lost. I had become a ghost in my own daughter's life, a man who had everything materially but nothing that truly mattered." Marina listened in silence, knowing he needed to speak. "You didn't just save Isabella," Robert continued. "You saved me too. You taught me that being present is more important than being successful. That love shown is worth more than love felt. That family isn't something you're born into, but something you build every day." "Robert, let me finish," he asked gently. "I want you to know that you and Sophia are not guests in this house. You are family, and not just because you live here, but because every day we choose to take care of each other, protect each other, and love each other." Marina felt her eyes fill with tears. For so long after Junior's death, she had focused only on surviving, on keeping Sophia safe and fed. She had never imagined she could find a place where she belonged again, where she was loved not for what she did, but for who she was. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting us be a part of this. Thank you for teaching us how to be a family again." A year after that moment, in July, the family had settled into a routine that ran like a well-oiled clock. Isabella had made extraordinary progress in physical therapy and could now stand with support for increasingly long periods. Sophia had adapted perfectly to her new neighborhood school and developed strong friendships with children her age. Marina had enrolled in a night course in education, encouraged by Robert to pursue an old dream of becoming a teacher. And Robert had learned to balance professional success with family presence in a way that surprised him every day. It was on a Sunday afternoon that Isabella made the declaration that would become the definitive milestone of their family's transformation. She had spent the morning working on an art project she had been developing for weeks and was finally ready to show it to the family. "Close your eyes," she requested, positioning her wheelchair in front of the sofa where Robert, Marina, and Sophia were sitting. When they opened their eyes, they saw a painting that left them speechless. It was a portrait of the family: Robert, Marina, Isabella, and Sophia, all smiling, surrounded by a frame of colorful flowers. But the most touching part was the two ethereal figures in the background, painted in soft tones of golden light. An elegant woman with long hair and a young man with a kind smile. "It's Mommy Helen and Daddy Junior," Isabella explained, her voice full of emotion but steady. "I wanted to put them in the painting because, even though they're not here, they're part of our family. They taught us how to love, and that love is still alive in us." Robert felt tears stream freely down his face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a gratitude so profound it couldn't be put into words. His daughter had found a way to honor the past, without being a prisoner of it, to include those who had departed without excluding those who had arrived. Marina hugged Isabella tightly, whispering words of pride and love in her ear. Sophia clapped enthusiastically, declaring it the most beautiful drawing she had ever seen. And Robert finally fully understood what it meant to be grateful. Grateful for the accident that had nearly destroyed his family, because it was through pain that they learned the true value of love. Grateful for having lost everything, because it was in loss that he discovered what truly mattered. Grateful for Marina entering their lives, because it was through her that they learned that family is a daily choice, not just a biological accident. That night, Robert hung the painting in the living room, in the place of honor above the fireplace. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, an imperfect but true family, founded not on the absence of pain, but on the presence of enough love to transform pain into wisdom, loss into gratitude, and an ending into a new beginning. When the girls went to sleep, Robert and Marina sat in front of the painting, contemplating the 6 figures that now represented their reality. "Do you think we made the right choices?" Marina asked, resting her head on Robert's shoulder in a comfortable, fraternal intimacy they had developed. I think we made the only choices we could, Robert replied. We chose love over fear. We chose presence over absence. We chose to build instead of just survive. Marina smiled, looking toward the future with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. Do you think Helen and Junior would approve? Robert looked at the ethereal figures in the painting, feeling for the first time since the accident that he could think of Helen without paralyzing pain. I'm sure they would. They loved us enough to want us to be happy, even without them. And now, we are. Sophia appeared at the living room door, still in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. I can't sleep, she said with the direct honesty of children. Can I stay with you guys for a little bit? Robert scooped her up, and she snuggled between him and Marina on the sofa, the three of them looking at the painting that told the story of how one family could be reborn from the ashes of another. Uncle Robert, Sophia whispered, nearly asleep, do you think we'll be a family forever? Forever, Robert answered, kissing the girl's forehead. Because a real family is one that chooses to stay together no matter what. And as Sophia fell asleep in his arms, Robert knew he had found the wealth that no business success could ever provide, the wealth you can hold, the wealth that forgives, the wealth that remains. Finally, he was home. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Isabella, Marina, and Sophia has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of pain, forgiveness, and family reconstruction, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing how love has the power to transform the greatest tragedies into new beginnings. Stories that remind us that family is not just about who we are born with, but who chooses to stand by our side when all seems lost. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where we will once again explore the deepest mysteries of the human heart and the transformative power of true love.